So if we start with you, Jenny,
Okay.
because you've been helping people. Just a little bit of background. How many years have you been working with people, particularly around the co-parenting area? Because that's one of the ways that you'll be able to help people in this group.
Yeah, 4 years officially this year. So I started my coaching practice back in 2019, and I didn't necessarily specifically focus on co-parenting at that point, but as sort of as I was talking to people, that was kind of where we ended up. So it was kind of like a natural calling
Yeah.
for me to end up there.
Perfect. And what's one of the reasons I'm really pleased to have you part of our little tribe and there to help people is because you have experience of things like parental alienation, which is not luckily for many parenting experts, it's not something they've necessarily had to deal with. So how did you get particularly into that area, which sadly makes you incredibly useful to a lot of people in the group?
Yeah, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, I wouldn't be where I was if I hadn't gone through what I went through, and I wouldn't change that for the world because I wouldn't have my son. So, you know what, everything I went through was in support of what I'm doing now. But I ended up in a domestic abuse marriage. I went through all the different kinds of abuses that you can imagine. And then when that fell apart and he was charged with battery and affray, and he was given a suspended sentence. But then all the parental alienation kicked in, the threats to kidnap my child, the stalking, the intimidation, the manipulation, you name it, it happened.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way how to deal with all of those things. And what I needed at the time was somebody that could kind of just like pick me up and shake me and say, stop,
Mm.
this is what's happening. This is what you're doing. Continue doing what you're doing, and it's going to last for like 11 years, which is how long it lasted. Um, and
Which sounds incredible to people when they haven't been there, but it's like bunny in the headlights, isn't it?
it is,
You're just in response mode, and of course it feeds in to
yeah,
exactly what they want, but it's
yeah,
incredibly hard to stop.
it's survival mode. And, you know, we went through the whole, if you leave me, I will find you, I will kill you. You know, we went through all of that stuff, you know, the abuse, the dents in the wall, the bit of flooring taken out because he threw a knife at me and it landed on the floor. And all of those things happened, and they were not necessarily what I would have wished for from a loving partner. But the problem is that they suck you in and they trap you, and they use all kinds of mind games to keep you where they want you. And you know, you've got people outside that are worried about you, that are saying, are you okay? You can talk to me, blah, blah. But you can't, because the fear and the manipulation is so great.
And
Um,
then when you're trying to co-parent with that person, even if you can get
ugh,
out of that situation,
it gets
that's the whole.
it almost gets even worse because at that point, you know, the gloves are off. They are there then just, you know, there's no sort of trying to play nice to keep you in the relationship. You just get the bad stuff, none of the good stuff.
Yeah. So where are you now with the like how many years on are you, and how would you describe the your co-parenting situation now?
Non-existent, because nothing to do with him whatsoever. Our son decided eventually that he didn't like the way that his father behaved, and he felt that he had to behave a certain way in his dad's sort of presence to be accepted, and he didn't like the way he had to be. So he chose to just cut off contact. And I said to him at the time, don't close the door. You may want to reopen that door at any point. I was trying very hard to be
Mm.
reasonable, even though my instincts were going, no, you know, yay, he's away. Um, so I was trying really hard to sort of, you know, be fair and reasonable and equitable in that situation. And you know, even then, when he decided not to see his dad anymore, we then had him turning up drunk off his face, with alcohol, police being called. Um, we had to apply for a non-molestation order.
Mm,
And even then it was like, oh, for God's sake, is this ever going to end?
mm.
But now it has. It's
And what
gone.
and what was because enough boundaries were put in place.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a case of, I have no need to communicate with you. There is nothing that you can say to me that makes any impact on my life. I want nothing to do with you. You don't get to enter my house. You don't get to threaten me in my own home anymore. You don't get to talk to me, you know?
And that sounds so reasonable, and yet it's incredibly difficult to do it,
Hard.
and almost impossible without some kind of support. I think
Mm.
particularly when you've got a child involved. But I have to congratulate you, Jenny, because despite all of that, and it is an extreme case, you're able to, no doubt about it, but you were able to still honor that your son's, right, it's his dad, and
Mm.
support whatever decision he made, which is a really difficult thing to do, but it is incredibly important for those children that they are, that's half of him, and your children have to work it out themselves. They don't need you alienating them against the other parent.
Absolutely. My son said, "What happened?" to me. It was a couple of years back now. He said, "What actually happened, Mum?" And I just handed him the newspaper and walked
How
away.
old? How old was he?
He was 3 when it all kicked off.
No, but when he asked you what happened.
Oh, I suppose about 18.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
my children. No, it wasn't until early 20s who they kind of started to question, sort of one at a time, and they were really surprised because I'd never. It wasn't their business to know what had actually gone on, and
No,
I just wait. And it's amazing how long they take, but they only ask when they're ready, and I think that's really
absolutely.
important. This is something I was saying to someone just the other day, is they were worried that the father was going to say horrible, tell his version of the story, and it's like, we'll let him, but just
Mm.
always be open. As long as your children feel they can ask you anything, and you're not going to make them feel bad because they've had a conversation and heard something different from the other parent, then actually, which is really hard to do, then they'll always, when they're ready, they'll always come to you, and they will make up their own minds. I think we just have to be not so terrified of people saying horrible things about us. I know that's easy to say with young children. There can be serious alienation issues,
Mm.
but at the end of the day, you can only control your side of it. I will ask you a little bit more about the alienation side, because obviously there are times when they just shouldn't see the other parent, and
Well, absolutely.
even the courts will prevent that. But Celia,
Yes.
I'm hoping you haven't got anything as traumatic as that to share. Please tell me.
Well, I have had quite a few fractured relationships, but not quite as traumatic as my lovely colleague here. But really, I mean, my background obviously started off professionally working as obviously as family lawyer, and then seeing all these cases, and then obviously having a lot of personal problems, personal losses, and then a very toxic relationship. But then, I decided that after various things had happened, that I didn't want to go back into private practice, and I wanted to do coaching because I wanted to help people, because I didn't have any support when I was going through this myself. And it's, no matter how qualified you are, and you would think, oh, but you know the process, you're a lawyer, you did this. Oh no, when it's you, when it's personal, all that goes out the window. And in your whole life, your whole focus, you realize what it's, you step into the shoes of your clients. And I was always very empathetic towards my clients. But then when all that happened to me, you really realize actually what it's like for them. And you can't think about anything else. It's your whole focus. It's your day, emails coming through, and it's always 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, and all these horrible things appear. And yes, it really changed the way I felt about it. So again, that personal experience has really helped me, because now I can help others, because I have that extra, it's the extra dynamic that I didn't have.
Yeah.
No matter how much experience you have, and how many clients you're actually acting for, until it's happened to you, then you realize what it's like. So
you just don't understand, like, I mean, it's like trying to describe childbirth to someone.
yeah.
You've had I had 3 amazing births and they were wonderful, but I was amazed how basic things that I experienced, nobody told me those things, or I hadn't read them in the books. It was all medicalized, and yet the sometimes the most beautiful sides of it aren't told to you. So sometimes it's the good stuff, not just the bad stuff, that is not shared. And unless you've experienced these things yourself, you just can't. It's not that you can't support people, but they need. I think people who are in a trauma, which is basically a lot of people that we all work with, they're in a traumatic situation. They need to know that you get it, that you've been there, because it and then you can be really not just supportive, but sometimes a bit bossy, clear, make sure that you can have an authority about what you're saying, that they'll take completely, because they know that it's coming from someone who has the compassion, but is also wants to make sure they don't make crazy mistakes and go down the wrong road.
I think the other thing to state is that, I mean, Celia, you were a lawyer going through it. I was a bank manager. It doesn't matter how good your career is, you can still fall victim to these situations, and the shame of it keeps you silent. When you're getting like 50 texts in a day, and the threat is, if you don't answer me, I'm going to turn up there and make a fuss. You're trapped, and they know that.
Did you know at that time that, which I only discovered fairly recently, was that your employer has a legal duty to keep you safe, even if that means putting a guard on the door to stop the abusive person guessing at you? It doesn't help you when you leave work, obviously, but were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware of anything like that at the time.
Yeah. And I don't think HR always advertise it particularly well, and some of them might not know, but no, it is I've been told that is and this is where the whole HR side of things, I think, and people in the workplace is really important part of the work that we're all involved in here, because a lot of the time there are things that, when we do have a certain rights to be protected by others, but we don't know, and it makes us feel even more powerless. And certainly a bank would have, I suppose it's the kind of things you don't necessarily want to have a chat with HR about. Did you tell them at all what was going on?
No, God, no.
Yeah.
I think there's this level of shame, this level of guilt, this level of, how could I be so stupid, that you don't want to share it, because your ego, your pride is kind of saying, no, don't share that. They'll think you're not good enough for what you're doing, and there is that level as well, that you don't want to share, because you have built a certain reputation within your field of being good at what you do, and you don't want anything to dull that shine. So you could be the most high-powered person in the world and still fall victim to one of these people, man or woman.
Absolutely.
Man, woman, or anything in between. It can happen to anybody.
You know what, Jenny, and I'm sure you agree with this, Celia, I think we should be talking to the banks about this, and saying, look, do you this is going on. We, apart from being able to share the resource hub with their employees, so that they don't have to go, they can find out basic information and resources, and find you guys without having to go to the HR. But nonetheless, HR and wellbeing staff need to know about this.
Absolutely.
Because they could be much more proactive, because that's not a healthy culture, and they're going to be losing good people because of it. Because if you don't feel safe at work, that's not a good sign, is it?
I ended up walking away from a 20-year career,
Wow.
which I didn't realize it at the time, but I was suffering from complex PTSD, anxiety, depression. I got to the point where I was having panic attacks, but I didn't realize it was panic attacks. It was like I was breathing like I couldn't get a breath all day long, and it lasted for days, and I couldn't stop it. And there are things like that happen, and the staff may be aware that something's not right.
Yeah, I
But
know my secretary was like that because she was saying, you know, you don't look well, you look really grey, and you're really thin and you're not eating. And she was noticing, but you know, there I was in my office and I'm getting text messages all the time. So I insist you respond to me, I insist you respond to me. And of course it's like, you know, you don't want to turn the phone off, because I had a mother who was sick at the time, so I didn't want to turn my phone off. So you're getting these messages and I'm trying to work. And it's like it's well, it's awful. As you say, I actually left my job because of that.
Right,
Because
this is it. Two people who, you know, the organisations you work with were putting time and money and effort to your training and wanted to get their money's worth out of you, and you've ended up leaving, obviously to the benefit of all the people who can now access you because you're not in those jobs. So it worked out well in that way. But actually, think of how many people are leaving the workplace because of those situations. Celia, can you say a little bit more about the kind of work that you really enjoy doing now, working with people, starting over, focusing on the future? And just to frame
yes,
that, often one of the things I say to people when I'm doing a divorce strategy session is like, I've got these, you know, financial people and mediators, people to introduce you to, but there's no point until you can answer the question, what do I want?
yeah. Well, what I do now is primarily is if it's divorce and breakup, then it's emotional overwhelm and being stuck and not knowing where they're going to go, having no clarity, no strategy. So what I do is I work with people to get that emotional overwhelm down. And that's really important because you can't make decisions when you're emotionally overwhelmed. And in divorce, you really do need to be able to make decisions. And that's the really good thing for me, in the sense, bridging the gap between the client and the legal team. And I've got legal, obviously, experience, so I can help navigate the legal process with them. So I'm sort of there. So I give reassurance as well. So if they don't have a lawyer ready, I can help people find a lawyer. And then I'm mirroring, I'm there. I mean, a lot of the clients like me to be copied in on all the emails that come through. And then they phone me and say, is that all right? Is that all right? But I can see it. It's like reassurance. It's constant, because it's very stressful. Because one client said to me the other day, oh, having a lawyer now, I've got more emails than I had before. And I said, yeah, it's just part of the process. And I said, it's all right. 5 emails have come in today. I've read them. They're all okay. You can sign the letters off. They're fine. So that gives them that reassurance. And I think it's really important. That's the one thing. Then also being stuck, is stuck in the emotions and not being able to move forward because they can't see clearly. You know, you need to give people a future. You've got to give people hope. You know, that's the whole point, that, you know, yes, you know, then this is why it's really important, obviously, for us, because we've all been through it, because we can say to people, yes, but, you know, obviously they are going through that really traumatic period of their life, but you do come out the other side, and you can come out the other side, and you can be happy again, and you can rebuild your life. You know, you can reclaim your life, especially in a position that, you know, if you've had an abusive relationship. And it's like you have to find yourself again. You have to, and we help people build up their confidence and become self-reliant, make decisions. I mean, I had one client, she never even had a bank account because of this coercive control. You know, I put a post out on social media saying, you know, one of my clients today opened a bank account, and it was like, and the comment being was like, you know, this doesn't sound very much, but for someone who's been under coercive control, this is a huge thing. So that's what I do, and it's very fulfilling. And I, you know, because all the things as well, I deal with a lot of personal loss, because it's not the knock-on effects, you know, breakup of relationships, also bereavement, loss of job, loss of identity. Because also when you know, that's the other thing, when you break up, you've been in a relationship for a very long time sometimes, and you almost lose yourself, and they have to find themselves again. It's like, it's building the confidence. So yeah, that's what I do, and
And sometimes
enjoy it.
they need that before they even start the divorce
They
process.
do, and I think a lot of them actually as well. That's the other thing. Come and say, you know, I'm not sure, and then you go through it with them, almost coach them on whether they actually want to go through, whether they want to try again, obviously what type of relationship they're in, how toxic it is, how abusive it is, how we can move them safely on from that, or just if they just want to make that break and don't know how to do it, and it's that transitional thing to help them with that. So yeah, I do that as well.
A lot of
So
people have a lot of guilt,
yes,
which isn't very helpful, really.
no, no,
Because quite often
no,
nobody's actually done anything wrong. It's just that
no.
relationship has
Yeah,
maybe served its purpose, or come to the end of its phase, and we don't always get to choose when that is.
no, exactly.
And it's I think it's the first time in ages I haven't seen Daniela, but I know that she's been full on. So hopefully she'll be able to watch this, because I think everything that you've both been talking about will be really of great interest to her and the other members of the group. What you've been saying has been so useful, and I wouldn't normally do this. I'm just reiterating this for anyone watching this, because normally these videos only stay in the group, but because we haven't got anyone from the group who's a member of the Secret Divorce group, but we've got you two wonderful professionals who are part of the gang. Are you happy for me to share this video, because it's fabulous what we've been discussing, and I think it's really, really valuable. I'd like to add it as an excerpt in the Divorce TV show live stream.
Absolutely fine by me.
You all look good.
Fine by me.
You all brushed the hair.
I think if it helps, it all helps. Yeah.
Obviously, it's on Zoom, so it's not quite as good quality as I usually get, but I think you've both got good microphones, and it's really good content. So just to round off with, and starting with you, Celia, do you know what would you say if someone's watching this and thinking, oh, should I talk to Celia? Obviously, just come and see me, message me, and I can give them a personal introduction to you. Or if they look on the website directory, they can also find you and contact you directly that way. What would be those people? What position are they in where they should definitely be going, actually, I will have a word with Celia?
I think, well, if certainly someone's literally split up and they're getting divorced and they really are in that emotional overwhelmed state, then that is definitely the time to come. But also before that, if they're thinking of splitting up and not quite sure what to do, that is also the time to come. And even if they started the divorce, it's the time to come, because, you know, often people then, because they're making decisions, and then they're suddenly overwhelmed with so many different professionals that they're seeing, and actually they need someone just to say, right, this is what you need, and to kind of almost set out a plan for them.
And that stops it being so overwhelming, and therefore less.
That's the thing. It's the overwhelm. It's the overwhelm. And if you're overwhelmed and stressed, you're not clear on anything.
And one of the big dangers that I sadly often see is the relationships clearly open, they may be living in separate places, but then it's not always this way around, of course, but he might say to the wife, you know, well, let's just take it a bit slow, let's just not move things forward. And I'm saying to them, but the marriage is over, what is the benefit of waiting? Oh, we don't want to rush it. And I'm going, what's he doing with his pension? Whilst you're doing this, you know, he's not selling any properties. Oh yes, we were going to sell the house. No, don't do that.
I had a client who was 20 years separated, and by the time that's exactly what happened, he'd actually moved all the money. So
he had plenty of time, didn't he?
I had plenty of time. Yeah, I was like, yes, exactly.
And the other one I think is very sad is that there's the mums who waited and suffered and stuck it out until the children are old enough, and they're no longer at school, no longer in full-time education, and I have to explain that their legal situation is very, very different than what it would have been a couple of years before, and which is not to encourage people to rush into divorce before they're, you know, just because they'll I'll say do better. Their needs are greater than if they've got the kids at home, but you can end up with, you know, two children at university and you're in a one-bedroom flat and they have to sort of share the sofa if they come and see you, because the judge isn't going to give you the same amount as what you would have if you'd started earlier. So it's you know, there's our basic practicalities, aren't there, that people need to come to you and talk about. Thank you, Celia. And Jenni, on that element of parental alienation, because there are times when, and I think that usually quite rare, because you have the most appalling co-parent, but usually they love the children, however inept they might be, then most of them are not doing enormous damage, especially if they can be persuaded to understand how damaging it is for the child if they speak ill of the other parent. But there are some who just don't care and won't listen and will continue to do that. I do know someone once where it was so bad, this was quite a few years ago, where the judge actually took this boy away from his mother because she was so toxic about his father.
It's classed as child abuse now.
Yeah. And he nearly had to go into care, but luckily the dad said, changed his work and said, no, I'll have him. So it would, could massively have. But I think, when people are in that anger state, they will sacrifice the children. But say a little bit about what the sort of legal situation is now for parents.
Parental alienation is obviously sort of something that people talk about, they sort of throw about a little bit, and it's a little bit like narcissist, kind of put a label on people, and that's okay. But in true cases of parental alienation, it's actually classed as a child abuse. Therefore, it can be treated as such in court. So, God willing, we never get to that point where it's actually parental alienation. But one of the things that I found when trying to co-parent with a very toxic ex who was saying all these things and trying to alienate the child from me was I was always very honest, child appropriate, but honest. But I also stuck to my word. I never made a promise I couldn't keep. I was always, if I couldn't tell him because, there was a reason I couldn't tell him, I would say, I have the answer, darling, but I can't tell you because X, Y, Z. And I'll tell you when I'm able. And by creating that level of trust with the child, by creating that honesty and that openness and transparency, you're actually giving the child an opportunity to think critically, to think, okay, well, Mum always does what she's promised, and she told me the truth, but Dad's story keeps changing. So which one do I believe? So you're encouraging them to think from an evidence perspective of what they're actually seeing rather than what they're hearing. So it's about giving them that skill, because nobody teaches them that skill. It's like nobody teaches us how to divorce. We're all just kind of, we all go through it doing the best we can with the resources that we think we have available at the time. But, we find out later on there might have been a better way. There might have been an easier way. There might have been, this, that, and the other resource. But at the time we didn't know it. So we did the best we could. But having that ability to teach your kids to think critically in terms of actions are more powerful than words. What are you seeing? So, Mum is saying that Dad is a bad person and he's horrible and he doesn't love us, but he loved us all the way through up until we moved. So what happened?
And also, one of the things I always say to people is, look, that child is half their dad.
Absolutely.
Half their mum.
Absolutely.
And nothing you can do about that. And in most cases, at some point you made a choice to be with that person.
Yeah.
There must have been some kind of emotional connection. And I would just say, look at your child and see the beautiful part of that other person. I know that takes a bit of doing at the moment, but there has to have been one, otherwise you wouldn't have made a baby with them. Actually,
they were good enough to make a baby with. Absolutely.
But it's very painful to look at a child and go, okay, that I can see the other parent in them, and it's the beautiful part of them that I don't see in that parent anymore, but it's in the child. It's very painful because it taps you back into what you probably once had with them, which of course is agonizing because it's now gone. And people want to stay, don't they, in the anger and the rage? They don't want to remember how the good times.
No, it's easier. It's easier to stay angry. And the one thing that I was always very conscious of was if I slated my son's father, I'm essentially telling him that half of him is bad. Half of him is a bad person. And that's not okay.
No. It's abuse. It's a child abuse.
Yeah.
And yet, we've all might have done at some point or another. And then I'm lucky. I always tell the story that I'm lucky that my parents, if I ever slip, not my parents, my children, if I ever slip, my children would say, "Don't you say bad things about our dad?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Give me a slip. I mean, it wasn't anything like horrendous, but nonetheless, they were absolutely right. So they had full permission to police my behaviour. I don't think they did that with their dad, but that's okay. But they, like you said, they make up their own minds. You just You just have to be consistent. You have to be their rock, really, don't you?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, both of you. It's been brilliant talking to you, and I'm definitely going to be sharing this conversation because it's full of lots of lovely gems. And yeah, and anyone watching this video who wants a introduction to either Celia or Jenni, please just let me know, and it shall be done. Thanks, guys. Bye for now.
Bye.